The following announcement has been paid for by the WZWA Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Insider's Edge podcast here on the WZWA Network. I'm your host with the most on the West Coast, Karlifornia and Fury. It's a joy to be with you all once again. And speaking of a joy, right here, right now, I get to talk to a guy I've been chasing for such a long time to get on this show. I'm very excited. I think we've got a hell of a lot in common. Ladies and gentlemen, you may remember him from ECW. He is the one. He is the only. He is devious. Don E. Allen, how are you, bro?
I'm doing good, Carl. How you doing, brother?
Yeah, I'm doing great, my friend. It's really
Awesome.
exciting to have the opportunity to talk to you today. Talk to you about your life, your career, all the things that you've accomplished in life. And Don, the first question, as per usual on this show, is when you're a young man, before you got into the wrestling business, how did you become a fan of professional wrestling?
It's pretty much my earliest memory. That and music. I mean, it's always been those two things for me since I was 3, 4 years old. I remember back that far actually, and people tell me even before that I was responding to those things on TV. But I grew up Northeast United States, so television was WWWF TV. You get the extra W back then, and that was Vince McMahon's dad's promotion, and those were the days of Bruno Sammartino, who was probably my first wrestling hero, followed by guys like Fred Blassie, people like that. Old school Gorilla Monsoon when he had the beard. I mean, this is when I was almost a toddler, and once I saw it, I was done. I couldn't take my eyes off it, and my parents kept waiting for me to outgrow it, and I never did. So there you go.
The same story rings true for a lot of people. I know my
Yeah,
mother was
sure.
waiting for me to grow out of it, and I never did.
And then when
So
I started, actually, I'm skipping ahead too far, but
sure.
you can only imagine their joy when I actually, started physically doing it, and coming home with body parts hanging off of me. But you know,
Well, let's dig into that. So how did you get into the wrestling business or find your way into it during that time?
um, I was a latecomer, first of all. I hate to talk about age, but I was let's just say I was well into my 20s and had gotten a little bit away from it. Concurrent all the way through with the wrestling was music. And I started playing professionally when I was still in high school. So age 17 or so, and I was already out playing in bars, and been doing that all the way through. So they were dual paths I was on, and um, for a while after high school, it was all music. But I was going to shows. I was going to shows when I could in Philly, not WWF. I was going to the NWA, which has started appearing up in the Northeast in the mid to late '80s, which was a thrill because that was. I'm skipping around, but what really got me, I loved wrestling that I saw on TV, but it was all I knew. And then at some point, we started to see wrestling from down south, late at night. Sometimes after midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, you would catch on a really bad UHF station, which was this was before cable. It was, you had to like hold the antenna to see it, that kind of thing. It was on top of the TV. But championship wrestling from Florida. And uh, my mind just exploded because I always took wrestling so seriously. And I had friends and my parents and everybody else didn't. And a lot of that was because the type of wrestling that was available to me on TV as I was growing up was a little bit of a cartoonish version of it. Um, I mean, there were some serious athletes. It was rough, but It was a lot of showmanship involved. That was the Northeast version of wrestling in the United States, and the WWF version. The Southern version was much more like an athletic competition. And I was just fascinated by it because it was still pro wrestling, but these guys were going at it as if it was amateur wrestling in a way. There was a seriousness to it, and everything from the way they punched to just their movements in the ring, and uh, it just captivated me. So that's really where I went in deep. And then through my 20s, I tried to find a way to get into the business. There was a wrestling radio show that was run by a guy named Joel Goodhart, who ended up starting the first real Philadelphia-centric promotion, which was TWA, Tri-State Wrestling Alliance. But before he had that, he had a wrestling radio show. I think he bought the hour every week on our local sports talk radio in Philly, and started listening to that, met him, went to shows at the Civic Center and places where the NWA was appearing, and he was bringing busloads of people to these shows, taking tours down south to see Jerry Lawler's promotion down in Memphis, things like that, which I didn't do. I didn't go that far, but I got involved a little bit, and was still trying to find a way to get inside. Met a guy who was working on a TV show for another local promotion called NWF, and their big guy was a guy named DC Drake, or Mad Dog Drake, who I later ended up working with. I didn't know who he was. I really didn't know what independent wrestling was. There really wasn't a lot of it in our area up in the Northeast at that time, or at least I wasn't made aware of it. But I started to realize that there was this whole like indie subculture going on that was starting to develop. And at the same time, the gym that I was going to and working out at, I met a guy who wrestled as Rockin' Rebel, and I don't want to spend too much time on him because he ended up doing some not nice things in real life later on. But at the time, he was a local guy to where I lived. Met him at my gym, and he started telling me that he was training at the Monster Factory, which was Larry Sharp's famous training school in South Jersey. And Bam Bam Bigelow came out of there, and names are starting to escape me, but the Bulldogs trained there. Not the Bulldogs, the Pit Bulls. Gary and Anthony, who I later worked with a bunch in ECW, and a bunch of other people. Big Show, Paul White started training there. And again, you look up Monster Factory, you can see that whole history there. We went to visit. I actually spoke to Larry Sharp about possibly training there, not to wrestle. I still had no idea I was ever going to get in the ring and do that. I just wanted to get involved. Maybe I could ring announce, maybe even referee, right? I had no idea. I was not smart to any of that at that point. And he and Rebel had some kind of argument. And so Rebel broke away and he goes, "Hey, I know another guy that's running the school." And we went down to the New Jersey shore, and I met a guy named Joey Maggs. Joey Maggs was an enhancement guy for WWF and WCW, and had worked around the South in different promotions. He was from Baltimore, Maryland, and he knew some people. I think he had worked with Bobby Eaton, or maybe had been trained by him. I don't have that whole story, but he was in the business, and he was running a school in the back of a gym in North Wildwood, New Jersey. So I started going down to that gym. I was working full time during the day, was playing 3 or 4 nights a week in bars and clubs. And the nights I wasn't playing, I was driving 2 hours down to go in the ring for an hour and 2 hours back home. And I was doing that 2, 3 times a week to learn my basics down there. He closed up. We stopped going. Then Joel Goodhart opened his own school because he wanted to start his own promotion. That was called Ringmasters, and that was in Northeast Philadelphia. And that was really the start. He was the guy that actually allowed me to kind of get in the ring and start taking bumps and start working. And that's the short version.
Right, that's very cool. Yeah, I'd seen a whole bunch of names connected to you as far as your training was concerned, and I wanted to ask a little bit about Jumping Joey Maggs because I remember watching him when I used to watch WCW.
Yeah.
Just do you have any personal stories about the man?
No, I didn't really, other than when we were at the school, didn't hang out with him a lot. And there was nights we would go down there and he was nowhere to be found. And I would train with Rebel and whoever else showed up. I met some people there that, again, I ended up working with in Goodhart's promotion. Big guy named Crybaby Waldo, who was a TWA guy, he's a big 400-pound guy. And he later did a gimmick as Big Slam Vader. Met some people who were more ex Larry Sharp guys down there. I think that might have been the first time I met the Pit Bulls. Maybe another local Philly guy who did a lot of work in the early ECW, a guy named Johnny Hotbody. There were people in and out. I got to work one show as Rebel's second, I guess, not quite manager, but I would lead him to the ring. I was waving at a Rebel flag, and I got to be around the match, but I was never physically involved at that point. But I got to be on a couple of shows with some old school names. Nikolai Volkov was around, and David Sammartino, and just again for me at that point, I wasn't even green. I was like nothing. But to be in the locker room and meet these guys, I'm like, holy, I was freaking out a little bit. Joey's funny. I surprised him because he knew that I hadn't ever been in the ring before, but a couple of times. And I would do certain things, certain sells and certain reactions. And I kind of already knew how to run the ropes, which is something that a lot of new guys, and if you ever watch even at the performance center now, when they're bringing in people that have never been in the ring before and they spend like weeks learning how to properly run the ropes, I kind of already had it right from the get-go. And I think it was just from having watched wrestling for all those years from when I was a little kid. I kind of felt it, before I got in the ring to do it. And it was much harder in the ring, but my instincts were already there from the selling standpoint. I wasn't a great athlete. I was never a great athlete, and anybody that watched my matches would probably be able to tell you that. But I always had a good instinct for where to be and how to sell. And if you can do that much, there's going to be a place for you, because those are people that are needed, in the business, to put guys over and to put them over properly and to make them look strong. Because if your sell is not good, no matter how tough the guy is that you're working with, it can just look stupid. So I remember him being surprised by that. So, oh, look at that. Where'd you get that from? And other than that, I didn't hang out with him very much. He showed us some stuff. I remember he was the first guy that showed me how to take the top rope and go over, and not kill myself too badly, that sort of thing. But a lot of that training was really just done by the other boys that were there that had been more experienced than me and just showing me things. Yeah.
Right. So I guess there does get to a point where you finally get in the ring and perform on a live event in front of fans. Do you remember the first occasion, the first match where you performed in front of an audience?
Actually, the first match that I was in wrestling gear. Now, again, I'd been in the ring and I'd taken a bump or two as like a manager type guy or a valet type guy. But the first match that I actually wrestled in public was for Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, and I broke my leg. Match. It's a great it should have told me something right there, because I remember my parents saying, "Well, you ready to give this up now?" And I'm like, "No." As you know, as I had the full leg cast for 3 months. It was a battle royal, and I was stomping on somebody in the corner in the middle of 20 some guys, and came down in a funky way. I guess I just was not I was not being careful enough, and hyperextended my knee backwards and cracked my tibia there. And we were it was about 100 degrees, and we're in the parking lot of a car dealership. There's a big crowd. Interesting. Steve Carino, one of the best, and a buddy of mine. Steve Carino was in the crowd at this show, and we've talked about it over the years many times. That was one of his first shows, and if you ever get to talk to him, you could ask him about it. Anyhow, so we're in the parking lot, and our dressing room was about 3/4 of a mile away, all the way around this group of buildings that we walked all the way around, and then we came down to the ring. People thought I was selling. They didn't realize I'd actually broken my leg, and I literally hopped all the way from the ring. First of all, I asked somebody to toss me out. I knew that much. I didn't just roll out. I said, "You throw me out, my knee's blown out." And so somebody threw me out, and then I hopped right past Joel Goodhart, right past the promoter, and he's just shaking his head looking at me. But he didn't realize how hurt I was, and I hopped all the way to the back. So that was a good one. That was my first live match in front of people.
What a great story. I mean, it's not great to hear that you hurt yourself,
No.
but it's just so funny that you finally got to do it. Your parents never really wanted you to do it, and the first time you do it, you break your leg.
Yeah, and it's on video. Someday I got to post that to YouTube if anybody cares to see it, but it is on video actually. So
Excellent. I would like to see it. So Tri-State Wrestling, okay, you've had your debut, you broke your leg. There's going to be a time where you come back.
Yep.
Could you just tell me, just a bunch of memories of your time working for Tri-State Wrestling?
Yeah, well, first of all, the training place, which was in the basement, like sort of a dank, smelly, moldy basement of a bodybuilding gym in Northeast Philadelphia, and you met a lot of people there, because a lot of people came in and out when Goodhart brought people in for the shows. I mean, Paul Orndorff and Austin Idol, and just a number of people like that were in and out, and that we saw and hung out with. Buddy Landell, people like that. And sometimes they would stay at Joel's place, and we would visit up there too. We'd have meetings, and we'd walk in, and there's Buddy Landell just hanging out. So that was kind of cool. You learn quickly to separate the fan from your job, but even now it's fun to look back at that and just think, here, these are guys I'm watching on TV with no thought in the world that somebody my size would ever get in the business. Of course, the business was starting to shift. This was right when smaller guys were starting to get more of a shot in the business, but up to that point, it was still like the land of giants, and so just to be able to hang out with these guys, and then ultimately to work with so many of them, and Hall of Famers, and there's just so many crazy memories. I remember being in the locker room one time, and I think I'm brushing my teeth, before a match, just being a good guy. We often will do that. And next to me is Ivan Koloff, shaving his head, and like we're just right next to each other, and he's just, he's one of my coworkers, right? He's on the card, but it's Ivan fucking Koloff, and when I was 8 years old, I watched him on television, and it was surreal. And there was a lot of those moments working with Jimmy Snuka, being in a couple of battle royals and facing off with him in the corner, and just you're thinking, oh, don't hurt him, I'm just saying to myself, and and I'm choking him, but we're working, and I just remember I remember being aggressive with them, but working light because you don't want to upset a guy. And I just remember going, he made this noise like, huh, like what's this kid doing? But he was cool. They were all, with rare exceptions, they took pretty good care of the young guys. And again, I'm all over. This could go on for hours, Carl, because there's just so many stories. And the more I talk about it, the more things filter in. But Goodhart ran some large shows. This is one of the reasons he went out of business, because he spent a lot of money bringing guys in who, to us wrestling fans, were famous, like real hardcore fans, but didn't have wide appeal in, say, Philadelphia, where he was running these shows. So he's bringing in Austin Idol, and he's bringing in Jerry Lawler before Lawler was part of Raw and all of that. And gosh, we had Owen Hart in on shows, and Luna Vachon, which is a whole other chapter of my career there. And just people that, again, to us were just giants in the industry, but we're a lot of Southern guys, and didn't really draw so much up here. And plus, it cost them a ton, I think, to trans them in, the transport and fly them in and pay them for their work. So ultimately, it was not a good business model for them. But being on the card with people like that, with Rick Rude and Manny Fernandez and Bigelow and Midnight Express and Jim Cornette. I mean, I met all these people and was on these shows with them. Unbelievable. It's where I first met Sabu. And even now, whenever I see him, I was like, I remember when we were, just they put us in a battle royal. I mean, the first time I met Sabu, he wasn't even featured on the show. He was just a young guy like us, and we were in a battle royal together, that kind of thing. So yeah, just a tremendous opportunity. And part of me is thinking, I don't deserve this. Why am I here? Except that I did whatever I was asked, and again, I put myself in the right place and in the right time. So I got lucky there.
That's very cool. I love hearing about all that kind of stuff. It's like it's so, how do I explain it? Like, you just, I don't know how to explain it. You have all these people that you've seen on television.
It's a cliche to say it was a dream come true. It was.
Yeah.
I could, again, skipping around, but I clearly remember the very first show we ever did at the ECW Arena, which was then still called Viking Hall. And there were a lot of name guys there. And one of the guys that was in was Hawk, Road Warrior Hawk. Yeah. And days before that, I knew they were coming in, and I was having a conversation with Todd Gordon, and I said, Todd, it's like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I had dreams of like being on a show with the Road Warriors. I can't believe I'm actually going to be in the locker room with them. And at some point, the afternoon of the show, he came over to me and he goes, your dream just came true. I'm like, what are you talking about? And they booked me to work with them. So that was crazy. It's actually the first match ever in the ECW Arena was myself and Lloyd Anoa'i, who
Samoan Warrior.
Yeah, exactly. It was us in a handicap against Hawk.
I just watched it yesterday.
That's right. I mean, it's not my greatest moment, but yet it was. You know what I mean? Because
of course.
It was a minute and a half or 2 minutes of pure joy for me to be able to do that.
I had to go seek it out, because as soon as I read that this match took place, I'm like, all right, I got to find this, got to see what happened here.
Yeah. And with the whole, I mean, it was our first time in there, and obviously the setup was it didn't look as professional as it ended up looking at that point, but it was still a 2-camera shoot. As long as you got a hard camera and a roving camera, you've got a fighting chance.
I think so too. And the word I was looking for before was surreal. I couldn't think of it. Surreal was what I meant.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Yeah,
it's a good word. Yeah.
So in doing my research, Don, please let me know if this is incorrect, because sometimes the internet can be incorrect. But it states that on the 1st of April 1991, you were in Atlanta, Georgia, and you wrestled for WCW, teaming with Lou Fabiano against the Steiner brothers. Is that true?
That is not true. That is not true. I did not work ever for WCW. I was on shows later with the Steiners, though I never worked against them. But when they were in ECW for the brief period that they were there, I certainly met them and
of course.
Was on shows that they were on as well. But no, that is not true. That's cool. I wish that probably would have been a center stage, so that would have been cool.
This is what I found, and again, like, I like to debunk these things that I'm like, that seems a little bit out of left field, but maybe it's true. Maybe there's a story there. Now we know it's not true, so cool, no problem.
I'm going to debunk the big one right now, if I may, which is, and it was done pretty sure as a rib, when I was in Pro Wrestling Illustrated's top 500, the PWI 500. I was ranked 3 years in a row. Number 500. The next year they moved me up to 499, and the last year they moved me up to 498. So it was quite a trajectory there. But they put in the little bio, and they listed me as 5'10", which I wish that I was in. I mean, in my boots, I was like 5'6". So, and sometimes I would meet people and they go, "That's you?" You know what I mean? I think I remember meeting. I don't know if it was Meltzer. It might have been Wade Keller, somebody, one of the Sheet guys in the locker room at the ECW arena. And I remember, I met him and said hello, and he kind of like did a double take, and I'm almost certain it's because, he never saw me in person, but he probably read that I was 5'10", and and then he sees this midget in front of him. It's like, what?
I did read that online. It says that your build is 5'10" as well. So
yeah, no. We were 5. I mean, I'm in boots. I was 5'6". I'll leave it there.
Fair enough, bro. Another question I had here. There's a switch from Tri-State to its successor, which is obviously Eastern Championship Wrestling, when Joel sold it to Todd. Do you recall that situation? And how would you compare working for Joel to working for Todd?
It was the venues changed, but Todd had been around. I wasn't privy to all the business stuff, but I had already been, I obviously knew and had become friendly with all of the people that were surrounding Joel while TWA was going on. Todd was one of them. And at first, I only knew him as the guy from the Variety Club, which was the charity that he represented and that we did some appearances for. And Todd used to have us go to a summer camp. That Variety Club is for handicapped kids. And they ran a big summer camp in the suburban, way out in the far suburbs of the Philadelphia area. And we went out and did free shows for them. 2 or 3 summers in a row, whatever guys we could get, local guys, and a couple of guys came, and it was literally their tryout. I remember at the time he was Damian Stone, him as Little Guido or Nunzio. But the first time I met him was on one of those summer camp shows, and he came down from New York and he worked with Tommy Cairo, who was another guy that they were sort of trying out. And they said, "Hey, well, it's not a paid show. It's a volunteer thing for the kids." But we set the ring up, and we had good crowds, and it was a place to work. And those were some of the only shows I did back then where I was not totally doing the job thing, because it was not for TV, and it was a private thing. So we got a chance to to show our stuff a little bit more so than we would at a paid show. But yeah, so I knew Todd as the charity guy, and then little by little, it started to become apparent that he was deeper in, more involved. And of course, Bob Artis, who you all know as our ring announcer, but he was involved to a degree, I think, on the business side as well, and his wife Lex. Two of the, I don't know if they ever see these things, but just two of the best people on the planet, and that I spent so much time with for a good 10 or 12 years. And grateful for their friendship. Anyway, so those guys were around, and they were still around as a transition to be the Eastern Championship Wrestling. So for me, it wasn't that much different. The venues changed. We started running different places, and the guys who trained me. Now, aside from Joey Maggs, I also want to do shout outs. My other two trainers and Rebel, my other two trainers were Larry Winters, who was a journeyman wrestler who's from Philadelphia, but worked all over the place, worked in Calgary, worked AWA, and a guy named Ron Shaw, who was a WWF guy in the 80s, an enhancement guy, but they actually gave him, they gave him a lot of work. He was a big guy. He was like 6'6", 285, something like that. So he was on TV quite a bit. And anybody can look him up and see what he was doing back then. So those two guys were Philly guys, and they also were trainers of mine early on. Just wanted to shout them out. Larry's gone, unfortunately, but Ron Shaw is still around.
Okay, well, yeah, cool, bro. That's of course. It's nice that to shout them out, and Bob. I've interviewed Bob, so I will link him this interview when it goes out. I'm sure he'll
absolutely.
He'll love to check it out.
I in fact, I mean, it's a crime that that I've been so out of touch with those guys. We don't live that far apart, actually, and I mean, I know they're still around and involved in the community. But there was a time when smaller independent shows, a lot of the guys from ECW and TWA went on to run their own small promotions locally around the Philly area. And so he would invariably be at those shows too, either just as a just come and check it out, or sometimes he was ring announcing at them. So we still work together through a lot of the 2000s, when I was working small shows after the ECW thing ended. And but it's been a while since I've seen them. So if you guys see this, I love you, and I have to call you and come visit. Okay, that's it.
Good. I think you should, bro. Another thing I wanted to ask you about here, because I love the name, Twisted Steel and Sex Appeal, with Hervé Renesto.
Yeah.
Please tell me a little bit about the team there that you formed, and any stories you'd like to share working with him.
We were put together. It was I don't know if it was Todd that did that, or it might have actually been Paulie at that point, because I'd met Paulie on the TWA shows, but he didn't really start working with us until we started doing TV tapings, which was it was maybe March of '93, and he was at the taping, and Terry Funk was there, and they were running the show in the back, it seemed. And so we'd never officially met, even though we had met. So, and shook his hand. He goes, "Oh, I've heard a lot about you," and I'm like, "Uh-oh," I don't know what that means. Obviously they lifted my E for Don E. Allen was a straight lift from Paul E. Dangerously, and there's been about 1 million E guys in the business since then. But
yeah,
but I think I was one of the first after him. And at that point, I had been for Goodhart, I'd been mainly a manager who also would get in the ring and work, but I was thought of as a manager. And Paulie and Todd didn't really have a place for me to do that. So I said, "Hey man, just let me work. I'll do whatever you want me to do." And so that's how I ended up doing all of those ECW arena and spot shows, mainly, working with guys higher up the ladder that would squash me essentially. That was my job, and I was proud to do it. But that was a sea change. I had been, the devious thing was not as much as a wrestler. That was more as like the pesky manager who would cheat,
Right.
on behalf of these guys. And I managed this guy, DC Drake, who was a sort of an Northeast legend on the what indie circuit there was. He was a big wheel on the indie circuit, and he also ran some shows as a promoter. So he was well known, and he was one of the first hardcore guys. Him and Larry Winters would, they did a lot of double color matches, a lot of blading back in that time. And this was just pre, the big HIV thing where people started getting a little squeamish so much about the blading stuff. But those guys, went up and down the East Coast in armories and school gyms and wherever they could. And they were doing, going up to the top of the gym bleachers and rolling down the bleachers and just doing the kind of crazy stuff that people weren't used to seeing up in the Northeast. And throwing the trash cans at each other and dumping, the concession stands on each other. It was a taste of the Memphis thing, but brought up to the Northeast with it was a little bit grittier up here. And anyway, so I managed those guys. Johnny Hotbody managed, and I was just like crazy, sneaky, heel, acted a little weird, tried to get people to, they didn't really hate me because I was, as a little guy, they just liked making fun of me. So people would shout, midget, midget, that kind of thing. We worked I worked with Hotbodies as manager against Snuka a couple of times, which was a big thrill. And trying to think of some other, the Black Hearts, which is Gangrel, right?
Yep.
Was one of the Black Hearts, Dave Heath and another guy named Tom Nash. And they came up from Florida, and I met them on the TWA shows and worked with them. And their manager was Luna, who was Dave's wife at the time.
Right.
And Luna, she rocked my world in the worst of ways. I mean, she beat the crap out of me, and again, it was an honor. But I had a couple of good tussles with her. Actually, before she beat me up, I actually helped her once. We had a Civic Center show for TWA. Civic Center was a big facility in downtown Philadelphia near the University of Pennsylvania. And those were shows that Goodhart ran where we had a couple thousand people, which at the time was a crazy crowd for an indie show. And just a real respectable place to be for a show like that. And they brought in Medusa to work against Luna. And part of my managing gig was I was co-managing DC Drake, with Nancy Sullivan, with Woman. And so that was another, sent from above, like, what right did I have, like a year or so into the business, doing this with these people? It made absolutely no sense that I was doing that, but I proved that they could trust me. And just what an honor, So we were literally, Nancy and I went out there and interfered in the match and helped Luna beat Medusa on that show. Right. So again, Hall of Famers that I got to work with for no good reason. I was just in the right place at the right time, and played my gimmick up pretty good. But later we had matches against the Black Hearts where she hit me so hard one night, she popped my eardrum on this side and knocked my jaw. She hit me over here and it popped the eardrum and knocked my jaw out of whack. And to this day, I had TMJ from that. But no complaints, because Tracy Smothers always used to say, it's not ballet, you know what you're signing up for. And a lot of those guys and gals worked really, really tight. And they would tell you, they had no problem telling you. They say, hey, we're right up on these people. At the arena, it was like that too. I can't tell you how many times in the back guys would come up and say, "Oh, sorry about that, but people were right there. I had to work tight." And I'm like, "No apologies necessary." And because I skulked off to nurse my wounds. But that's something that until you've done it, it's hard to describe. I've tried to describe it to people in years past. The understanding, that you're going to go out there and do what you're going to do, and it might hurt you, but you do it because that's what you have to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
And you don't resent it, and you don't resent the other guy. I can think of maybe once or twice my whole career where I thought somebody was being like really like reckless beyond the point of needing to be. But even then, you come back and you say thank you, and if you wanna stick around, you just deal with that. You wisen up a little bit and you protect yourself maybe a little more next time. But it's and I'm no tough guy. You know what I mean? Uh, that was not my thing. I'm not a tough guy on the street, but in the context of the wrestling ring, there was almost nothing that you could ask me to do that I wouldn't do, for my art, right?
Of course.
Um, Public Enemy, I was the first guy to go through 2 tables with them. It was
Really?
before Dreamer, before anybody. It was the first time, and Teddy, God rest his soul. I could say that about so many of these people. So
Yeah.
I'm just gonna give a blanket, God rest their soul, to all of them, and to Luna and Anthony Pitbull and all these guys that were good to me. But Teddy came up to me and he goes, "Listen," he goes, "this is what I want to do," and he described it. And I thought about it for a second, and he looked at me. He goes, "Listen, it's probably going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you." And I said, "Hey, whatever, I'm down for it." So so that's it's another moment on the WWE network you can find. I forget who I was teamed. Oh, I think it was I teamed with Canyon in that match.
Oh, right. Okay. I did
Yeah.
read about that. There was a match that
Yeah,
you teamed
so
with him.
it was Canyon and I against Public Enemy. I had a lot of interesting partners against those guys. Dwayne Gill, who we
Of
talked about the other
course.
day, right?
Yeah.
Tagged against them with Dwayne, and somebody else that escapes me who uh, I had three or four official, like televised matches with Public Enemy that were a lot of fun. Actually bladed on one, and that was rare for me. I mean, I wasn't, you know, it was rare that you would have an underneath guy, like a way underneath guy like me,
Yeah.
bother to bother to do that. And it was only ever a couple of times in my whole career that I did, and that was one of them. They wanted some color for this one TV match. And another time worked with Kevin Sullivan and Sherry Martel, where I bladed, and that was Sherry Martel. Jeez, I mean, the nicest, like so freaking nice. And Sullivan was good to me. I'd worked with Woman before I ever met Kevin, I think. So I have a feeling she said, "Oh, he's cool. You can work with him." I don't know if she did, but that's my gut feeling is she did, because he beat the crap out of me. But I've seen it. I've seen other guys get it even worse. So
I just quickly hopped on the internet then and saw that you also teamed with Dino Sandoff.
right, Dino Dave, who later worked, and he worked for a ton of years. I think he may have stopped finally, but he developed a character called Cujo on the Indies after ECW, and worked quite a bit. Really good guy, and he turned into a really good worker too. But he was another guy who was just willing to do whatever, to be there. And we teamed up. We also did a few things. We worked against Taz once in a handicap, and I worked Taz solo a few times, but for some reason we did a handicap against the Tasmaniac before he was Tazzed out, and then I worked with him when he was Taz. But yeah, great guy. And they got his name. There was a local promoter named Dino Sana, So they did that a lot. Mikey
Right.
Whipwreck's name was a takeoff on a promoter from, I think, from Virginia or Maryland, whose name was Dennis Whipwrecked. I think that was his shoot name, and so that's how they got Mikey's name. And Dino Sendoff was just, this guy Dino Santa. They were just taking a rib.
Right.
So that happened a lot. Joel Hartgood was another guy I teamed with, right? And you can see him. We had a brutal match against Ian and Axel Rotten that was on TV, where they just killed us. And in fact, to this day, I have neck problems from that match, but it's another story. So on the network, you can catch it. Just watch the final power bomb at the end to see what happened to me. But his name was Larry McKenna, I think. But they called him Joel Hartgood as a rib on Joel Goodhart. So
Right.
that kind of thing happened a lot. But yeah, we worked Taz. We worked Dean Malenko. We did.
Yeah.
If you can imagine, Dean Malenko having a handicap match, and he and I are essentially the same height,
Yeah.
but he was the shooter, man. It was
Yeah.
awesome. Smooth, very smooth, great guy. Funny.
That is super
Phil.
cool. I
Mhm.
wanted to scale back to the double table spot actually, and just ask you how it went.
Yeah. No, not a problem. Looked brutal. Again, it was new at that. Now it's another day at the office for 3/4 of the business. But back then it was a new thing, and the timekeeper who also ring announced sometimes, Rocky Musiano, another great guy who I miss. He he came over, and Todd came over after the bump, and I'm selling it. I'm out, and I'm selling it on top of the tables, kind of folded over top of me. And the only bad thing of that, when it folded real quick, it did smack me in the head, but it was nothing. It's nothing worse than the potato from Axel Rotten, let's say. But the way they did it, and I remember Rocco came and he held me by the wrist like he was checking to see if I had a pulse, and just shaking his head, and everybody played it really seriously, and it sold the whole thing. It was really good. But Teddy got up on the top rope and did a somersault, like a somersault senton kind of a deal, onto me, and that's how we went through the two. But they both broke, and it was perfect, but it had not been done there before until then. So that was another first I got to be part of.
That is awesome. Cool. I love hearing those stories that I'd never heard before, even if it seems like there's this tiny moment in time. I find it to be
it's fun. I don't think about them all that often, so to bring them up is cool for me too, because sometimes it seems like a different life. I mean, it was 30 years ago almost at this point. I was 90.
Yeah.
I was 94. So and it's
Yeah.
amazing. I'm only 29 now. I don't know how that could be, but
yeah, no, I find that doing these interviews, people start unlocking memories that they haven't thought about in a long time. So that's probably the most fun part of this. Being in ECW, obviously a lot of people sometimes wear a lot of different hats to help out during these early days. Was there anything that you contributed to the company other than performing on the shows?
Anything and everything. It's again, you can't, in the position I was in, you can't have an ego about stuff. If you get asked to do something, you do it. I mean, or you don't come back. That's the way it was. And I can tell you, in like near the arena itself, which was a densely populated urban area, all around there, and there was a lot of little shopping plazas and places like that. And in the early days, especially, Paulie and Todd wanted the houses to look amazing. Like they wanted it to look like people were standing room only, hanging off the rafters, that kind of thing. And it was not that way those first couple of years. The crowds were getting bigger every couple of weeks when we were there, and we were there every couple of weeks for a long time. But it was not yet sold out like it became. And so they would they would give myself, a really good guy that worked in the office there named Andy Weinberg, who came up from Maryland and was friends with a lot of the Maryland-based guys like Axel and Ian and Hack Myers. Again, miss him too. Those guys, and so he ended up being part of the office. And during the pay-per-views, you would often see him as the headset guy at the timekeeper's table, helping to run the show. But for a long time, he and I would get asked to take stacks of tickets and go out onto the street and go to the shopping plazas and go to the supermarkets and, no lie, the local strip clubs, and try to hand out tickets and get people, like, talk them into the building, and people didn't know our guys then, a lot of them. So you'd have to go, oh, you just got to come see this, and they go, oh, is Hulk Hogan there? No, but you're going to see something you haven't seen before, and we literally went out and did that. Sometimes I would do it in my gear. I do, I do a 911 spot. We'd start a match with me and, somebody of my ilk, like a Chad Austin or Stone Cold Chad Austin, I will tell you, and or Dino or something like that, and maybe we'd be doing a tag or we'd face off against each other. Sometimes they would tell us to go out and just, stink it up on purpose. I didn't need that much prompting to be able to do that, of course, but yeah, we understood that the idea was to get the crowd against us so that 911 could come and make his entrance and save the day by chokeslamming the crap out of us, right? So we did that a bunch of times. That was an angle that never got old for the crowd. But I would do that, and then still in my gear, I'd come back and they say, hey, we need you to we need you to go over to, Pizza Hut or Chuck E. Cheese or, or the Acme supermarket and see if you can hand out some tickets. And so we would do that. It was not always easy, especially in the early days, but that's what they wanted to do, to try to, I think they call it papering the house. I think that's the official term.
Yeah.
And I guess I can talk about it now, 30 years on, but, at the time you didn't talk about it. You went out and did it, but you didn't tell people you were doing it. But yeah, that, every once in a while, Paulie would come up to me or Todd and say, listen, I need you to do you have Western Union in Australia? Like where you can wire money to somebody across the country or something like that?
You know
I don't
what?
know
I've always heard of it. I've always seen it on commercials from American
yeah,
television,
now I
but
guess
I've never seen one here.
you would PayPal or Venmo somebody,
Yeah, yeah.
but back then that didn't exist. So, I might get handed a wad of cash, no questions asked, just go and take this. And it was all the way across town. So I'd be leaving the show in the middle of the show sometimes to get in my car because they knew I had a car that I drove down and go all the way across town to deliver this money, to the Western Union office, so that the money could be wired to California to somebody or other. I don't know what it was about, and I don't want to know, but that kind of stuff. So they just knew, they trusted me, and they knew they could. They knew they could, and they could. So and they knew that I wasn't, I didn't goof around. I wasn't, I was never drinking, and I wasn't doing any drugs, and fine for the people that were doing that. Some had to do it, or for some it was their gimmick anyway. But they knew I was like a straight and sober guy, even though I was a long hair rock and roll guy. They knew they could trust me to do that kind of stuff, and so I did it. And I would go. Sometimes I would go to shows without having any. I would say the majority of the time, I would show up having no idea if I was going to be on the card or not. I never knew, and I would just be ready. I would make sure that I was ready, and you had your gear with you, and you either get asked to go out and drop off some tickets somewhere, or they say, hey, gear up, we need you to go take a choke slam, or whatever it is, and by always being ready, you get to have those interesting moments. And I did a lot of weird off the wall stuff. One time I was the guest timekeeper for a 30-minute Iron Man match with Van Damme and Sabu. Like, why was I doing that? I don't know, but that's that's what they asked me to do, and it exists, and find it online, and there I am signaling, and we did it legit. Paulie wanted to do it legit, 30 minutes, and give cues to Fonzie and the whole bit. I had to borrow Tammy's, Sonny, I had to borrow Tammy's watch because I needed to have a watch. Nobody had a stopwatch. And so, she literally gave me some gold thing off her wrist and said, "Don't you dare lose this." I'm like, "No, ma'am." uh, she was somebody else. I met her and Candido on the first TWA shows. So I knew them from 1990. And Tammy wasn't even in the business yet. She was just sitting in the back. And I remember talking to her about, she was thinking about going to med school or maybe being a veterinarian. There was not one word about her going into the business. Although
Right.
I think Chris might have had her bring him to the ring once, but she didn't like stay, something like that. But yeah, this was before she went to Smoky Mountain and really started to get in the business, and so yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for sharing all that. I find that stuff
Mhm.
interesting. I find it interesting, the little jobs that, different people had within the company. And I always ask everyone from ECW, especially from this era, about that. So another thing I want to talk to you about, and get back to talking about more of like the in-ring stuff.
Mhm.
I mean, it's no secret. You lost a lot of matches. You've talked about
Yeah,
losing a lot of
yeah, just
matches.
a few, just a few. I got to win a few later, but it was on a much smaller scale, with much smaller promotions. But eventually, people looked at me in the locker rooms like, "Oh, there's the vet. We ought to we'll get a little rub off of that guy because he was, he'd been where he'd been and worked with who he'd worked with." So that was cool later. But yeah,
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 it's because I think it's an important role, and I've always said this. I've had Dwayne Gill on the show, I've had Barry Horowitz on the show, and they talk to me about the pride that they had in their job. Um, you know, how did how did you feel about that job and the importance of that job? And would you agree with me that somebody in that position is just as important as the top guy?
I- yeah. I don't want to. I mean, it's nice to hear other people say that, and I guess I do agree, but I'm not. I don't want to overplay it either. It's probably might be less important today on the majors because you don't really have squash matches anymore,
Yeah,
which is that's the term I like to use. But um, because everything's hot shotted, they don't take back in the day, they would take 3 months, 6 months to build somebody up. And how do you build them up? You put them in front of people with somebody that they just take apart, and that was an important thing. It was a big thing on the old TBS TV shows, the NWA shows in the 80s. You had the guys like the George Souths and the people like that who were good, really good hands in the ring, but clearly their job was to build the Barbarian and was to build Manny Fernandez and Rick Rude and to build the Midnight Express. I mean, that's what they were there for. And some of those guys were not so hot, but a lot of them were really good workers. They just, and you knew if you were a worker, you would watch them and go, "Oh yeah, I appreciate what those guys are doing." The average fan would just go, look at those jobbers."
yeah,
Now there's less of that, but I think there's more appreciation for what the underneath guys do and what the job guys and the enhancement guys do. It just doesn't. You don't see it as much uh, when I first started getting in. Like this guy Rebel, he was Larry Sharp would send a bunch of his trainees, a bunch of his guys who were not yet out in the world really, except for his own shows, but he would send them to WWF TV, and they would tape a ton of TV, and they had whatever their auxiliary shows were, main event, superstars, and whatever they were, um, and they would build up their guys. So I could watch TV and see Brutus Beefcake versus Rockin' Rebel, Brutus Beefcake versus Johnny Hotbody, or they might have called him by his shoot name. But you would see these guys because they were trainees, but Larry Sharp would send them, and Larry used to work for Vince McMahon's dad back in the day, so they trusted him as a pipeline to send workers, and that's how a lot of guys got their start. Pit Bulls did those jobs, a lot of guys, and so it was a bigger deal back then. You don't see that so much anymore. AEW, I don't watch it a ton, but I check it out online a good bit, and they do the same. It seems like they do the same kind of thing because they will bring in local talents and people who, before they sign them, they'll have them come in and they give them some extra offense. I think a lot of them, but in the end, they're there to build up people, and the ones that really have charisma and talent, they end up signing. So there's still a place for it. And it's a good way to work. I mean, I've trained guys, not recently, but I spent some time in the 2000s training some guys, and I never thought I would do that. But once you start to work with them, you realize how much you learned by being in those matches and being around guys that knew what they were doing. And I wasn't trained by any of them necessarily, except that I could see what they did and how they did it, and I'm able to impart that on on other guys, on new guys. So that's something I enjoy doing. I would like to do more of that in the future if I can find the time. But I got to train a good few guys back in the early 2000s, and you don't even know what you know sometimes until they ask you a question and you start to point things out to them. I never did all the flying, crazy. I was not a spot monkey, and certainly couldn't do it today. So my thing was positioning, footwork, realism. I stress that I'm not as big a fan of the crazy high spot dance where it looks like they're dancing. It's not really my thing. To me, Terry Funk is a hero because you believed him. And guys like that. So if you throw in one or two high spots, I don't know. That's a whole other conversation. But I'm not a fan of there being 38 finishes in one match.
I agree.
Even though people know what they're watching, I think you can still suck them in with a certain realism and a certain believability if you do it right. And it bothers me when you see people get up and walk away not selling a spike pile driver or something that should kill them. That's
exactly.
just my personal taste in wrestling.
No, I'm the exact same. I get pissed off when I'm like, you could have killed that guy with whatever it is you hit on him, that unrealistic thing that you just did to him. That there's no way that it's humanly possible to do that unless he's cooperating with you. Or gets spiked on his head and then he's out at two.
Or at least sell the stuff afterwards to some degree. No, again, it's a philosophy, and you can't complain about it because things have evolved to this, and I don't know if it's ever going to go back. But people that watch MMA, for instance, they understand if you get
Exactly.
Sometimes things that don't necessarily look like they're that brutal, you learn how brutal they really are because it's just a joint. You manipulate that the right way, it will break. And so I always liked that. When I was a kid, that was that difference between WWF and the wrestling from Florida, where I got to see guys like very young Bob Ortons and very young Barry Windhams and old school guys like Bill Watts and Eddie Graham and it's where I was first exposed to a guy named Billy Robinson,
Oh, of
right?
course.
Who's, one of the great shooters, and it didn't physically, I mean, he was a big dude, but he was not a bodybuilder. I was used to saying, hey, superstar Billy Graham, he's got all those muscles. He must be a great wrestler, right? And then you see a Billy Robinson who can, turn you into a pretzel,
Yeah.
and just it had such a big effect on me. And so from that time on, I always more appreciated that realism. And for me, as a smaller guy, I knew I had to sell. There's no way that I should be recovering quickly. Sometimes people would say they thought I was selling a little too much. I remember a crowd once. Here's another crazy thing. I found myself working with managing Abdullah the Butcher against Bam Bam Bigelow on a couple of the TWA shows. This was in 90 and 91. Like, what was I doing in the ring with these guys, right? There I was, and learned a lot of stuff there. But there was one match where Bigelow headbutted me, and then he picked me up and he gorilla press slammed me. And there was still maybe 10, 15 minutes left to go in that match. But I stayed outside and I sold the whole rest of the match because that's what I was supposed to do. And I could clearly, like it was yesterday, I remember some smart fan, going, "Ah, oh, come on, you get up, that's ridiculous," and I didn't even acknowledge him because, it's not for him to say. but the rest, to everybody else that was maybe not so smart, they just thought I was dead, which
Yeah.
is what I wanted to think. And I was not going to go back in that locker room after that, not selling that for the rest of the night. And that was another thing that we got taught by these old school guys. You sell that all the way to the car,
Of
I mean, when
course.
we did a lot of shows in like places like sports bars and downtowns where when you left, you were walking right through all the fans, and then you're walking down the street. People could see if they wanted, they could walk alongside you and talk to you. I mean, it was not like it was backstage and you could escape, right? And I sold all the way to the car. And then even when I was in the car and I was at the lights anywhere near there, I was still, I was holding my head, or I was making it clear that I was not in good shape. Sometimes I wasn't, right? For real. But that's the thought pattern. It's that sell is everything. And if you do it well enough and long enough and convincingly enough, people start to have doubts in their mind. Like, oh, maybe he really got effed up, and
Yeah.
that's what we're after. So
I think that's incredible. And I think a lot of wrestling fans out there don't understand or maybe not even appreciate the fact that someone would go to these lengths even well after the show's over just to
yeah,
protect it. I think that's really cool.
yeah. I drove home once with an eye, like gauze all over my face and one eye covered because I got another old dear friend of mine, a guy named Glenn Osborne, who who worked TWA and early ECW stuff, and went on to be an indie player. Did indie main events up and down the coast for years. Real big, real big guy, and a great guy. But we used to travel to shows together, and one time he he threw a fireball at me, in a match, and it actually did singe my hair a little bit, which smells horrible if you've ever smelled burning human hair. Um, but I sold that thing with the gauze and everything over my face, and I had driven to the show, so I'm limping out to my car with this stuff, and there were some fans out there, and they're asking, how you doing? I was like, I don't know, man. I'm gonna try to get home. I think I'll be all right. And I kept that on for probably 20 minutes till I finally took it off when I was way away from the venue. So yeah, it's just the way I was taught, and uh, it's how we did it.
That's brilliant, bro.
Yeah.
You get to work with a lot of legends during these days. I really didn't want to skim past any of this because I feel this is important stuff.
Mhm.
Don Muraco, Ivan Koloff, Stan Hansen, Roy Hawk,
Mm.
and
Uh,
the list goes on. Have you got any tales of, I guess, maybe some of your proudest squash match losses?
Yeah, all of them. I mean, people still talk about Hansen to me, at least other workers that I know, because you know, they know what he's about, and I guess now the general public kind of knows too that he was another Terry Funk-esque kind of guy in that he wanted to make people believe, and he did. It was easy to believe him. I, he was just he was huge. He wasn't the tallest guy. I mean, he was tall compared to me. Might have been 6'2", maybe 6'3", but he was just a house. Not a fat guy, not a muscle guy, just big house. And he couldn't see, which again you'll hear from everybody. And he even said it to me after the match, because he had actually knocked me out. Oh, here's something you can see on the you see this on the WWE Network. Although I don't know if my name is in it. I think it said Stan Hansen. Maybe it says something like "Destroys Jobbers" is the title, something like that. But it was me and Hervé Renesto. Twisted Steel and Sex Appeal. Good luck there. That was actually the only promo we ever cut, and that I ever cut for ECW television. We did a promo before that match against Stan Hansen, which is a riot. But yeah, so Stan had me in the corner and went to do a chop, right? But I think I was so short, or maybe he just wasn't looking. But instead of getting me in the chest, he hit me right in the jaw, and I was knocked out for a few seconds. And the next thing I know, I was on the ground, sitting on the mat. And the next thing I know is he kicked me really hard, not with the flat of his foot, which is how we would teach people, but with the point of his cowboy boot, right in the middle of my spine, and that woke me up actually. So it was bad, but it was good. But yeah, and you can hear it if you listen on the audio of the thing. I don't know that you see it so much, but you can hear it, and it's actually my face, not my chest, that he's hitting. And afterwards, he actually came up to me and says, "Oh, yeah, I can't see what I'm hitting, and I can't hit what I'm seeing." That was his quote to me. I said, "No problem, sir. Thank you." Um, I think the referee, John Finnegan, actually whispered to me before the match. He said, "Protect yourself," because he knew, and that was really rare for him to say something like that. Um, but he did, yeah. So, but again, it's what we signed up for, and it was an honor. I mean, I saw him break Bruno Sammartino's neck, when I was a kid, and here I
Yeah.
am in the ring with the guy. Now, a normal person would think, oh, shit, I don't want him to break my neck. Me, I'm thinking, I can't wait to take that freaking lariat to say I did it. So, um, and he knew. He actually took it easy on me. The finish was the lariat, but instead of doing it off the ropes, because he knew I was in a bad way, I think, is he just lifted me up by my hair, and he did it as I was standing there, as he was holding me up by my hair. So it could have been worse. But he suplexed me in. He threw me out, and he suplexed me in from the outside, and the whole ring shook. And I only weighed about a buck 70, buck 80. Then this was in 93, so I had not even gotten bulkier yet. And that, just the force of him doing that to me, and the whole ring shook. The referee's like bouncing up and down. And anyway, so yeah, it's a
Amazing.
good one. You can find that one too online.
Yeah,
So.
I can't wait. I'm gonna look for it after this is over. That's for sure. I'm sorry, I don't mean to say I can't wait to see you get
No,
hurt.
no, it's hey, I'm happy if anybody watches it.
Absolutely. And I want to bring up some other names of ECW guys that you worked with over the years. And if you have a story, please share. Or, if there's no real story, but you just want to give your thoughts to them, please share that as well. I know you wrestled this guy quite a few times in your career, Shane Douglas.
Yeah. Rarely. I don't know that we ever had a match, but we had some angles. I just saw Shane too. I don't go to conventions or any of that stuff. Very rarely. I went to a reunion at a convention, an ECW reunion in like 2007 or 2008, and I went to the reunion shows that we did in Philly, and got to do a really neat spot on one of them. With just because I had my gear there, and I think Raven said, "You doing anything?" And I said, "No." He goes, "Now you are." So cool stuff like that can happen. But I went to a reunion convention thing just in December, and
Right.
got to talk to Shane for the first time in a while. And he was always cool with me and good with me. And but yeah, we did a couple of angles. I think when he first got to ECW and they were trying to establish him as a heel, he called guys out from the locker room, to challenge anybody who wanted to challenge him. And Hervé and I both came out, and I think he beat us both in a couple seconds. Headbutted me, and I think I got belly to belly, and then he super kicked Hervé, I think, or maybe he super kicked me and we belly bellied him. Anyway, so there was that. There was another thing a few years later, same kind of idea. He was calling guys down from the locker room, but this was, by then we had much better production and it was a bigger show. And I think Hack Myers and myself and somebody else. It was some kind of angle with Too Cold Scorpio and
Oh, I
Shane.
remember that. Yeah.
I vaguely remember it, but what I remember is that I kind of half botched he did a Tully Blanchard's old thing, that slingshot suplex.
Yeah.
He lifts you up off the top rope, and then, which was not something he normally did, but because he had to beat 4 or 5 guys in a row, he had to use a different finisher on each one. So that was the one we did, and I'd never taken it. And again, it doesn't seem like it would be a big deal, but I just remember feeling like I didn't do it so well. But so there was that. There was a lot of those little quick things, with Hall of Famers. Ron Simmons, did a run in with Ron Simmons where he spine busted me, and just all kinds of cool stuff. There was one cage match. It was one of the angles we did where I think Lawler and Rick Rude were involved, and Van Dam and a bunch of people, and they were blocking people. We were coming out to try to save maybe Dreamer, and guys from the locker room came out, and they wouldn't let us in the cage, and we were trying to climb up the cage. Actually, Candido, for some reason, was out there with me. I don't know why he would be, but because it should have been lower level guys than him, but he was out there, and we were climbing up the cage, and then they had, I think Sandman was in there, so they had Singapore canes, and Van Dam was like poking me with the cane through the cage and knocking me off the cage, and I remember being on the floor and Bigelow coming by and kicked me in the head. He was part of the angle too. So again, just random little things that just make up that whole tapestry of what I got to do. That is really cool.
Yeah, it's cool. And another guy I really wanted to ask you about, if you have any stories about, is Raven.
First time I met him, and he won't remember it, but the Monster Factory ran a open to the public tryout on at their facility, which was in a rural, at that time, was in a real rural part of South Jersey to you Americans. And I heard about it on Joel Goodhart's wrestling radio show, right? So I just decided to go and check it out. I wasn't going to try out. I just wanted to kind of see what it was about and hang out and see if anybody famous would show up, So I met Larry Sharp, Johnny Rods, the immortal Johnny Rods, WWF. I don't even call him a job guy. He was like their low level enforcer.
Right.
All the guys coming in would have to go through him. Like he was their tryout match at Madison Square Garden and stuff like that. Old pro. I mean, and he ran the training center that Dreamer and Bubba and Taz all went to. That was his facility in New York. They all started their training, and Devon, they all started their training with Johnny Rods, amongst a lot of other people that did. Anyway, so he was there as a guest, and he worked a short match with one of the Larry's trainees. But one of the Monster Factory trainees that was on that outdoor tryout show was Raven. He was Scotty the Body at that point. And so that was the first time I saw him and met him. And from there, I didn't see him again until he came into ECW. But good guy, really, really good to me. For whatever reason, he liked me. And, I got a lot of really cool opportunities through him, just because, he was just cool to me. And I am always grateful. He put me in that Kiss gimmick with Stevie Richards and Blue Meanie and Nova, which was a highlight of my career. And I got to tell that story a little bit anyway. It was one weekend where we had a spot show on a Friday night in the arena on Saturday, and I was at the Friday night show, and Scotty came up to me and he said, Raven, and he said, he goes, "We're thinking of doing Kiss, and we need the fourth member. We need the drummer, And I said, I happen to have a pair of drumsticks in the car, because I did. I just always had equipment in the car, right? So I had a pair of drumsticks in the car. I went and got them, and he had to make me up because I was not a Kiss fan. They just were not, they weren't one of my bands, right? So I didn't even know. I knew they wore the makeup, obviously, but I didn't know the character of the drummer, Peter Criss. So they made me up, and we went out and we did this gimmick with Sandman and Scorpio, I think it was, and people went nuts. And they said, okay, we're going to do this tomorrow night at the arena again. So again, I went down there and they made me up, and that's when we went out and did the Rock and Roll All Night thing, which again you can find online if you're curious. JT Smith came out and introduced us using this Italian accent from the FBI, and he says, "Here's Kiss," and people were like, "What?" And then we came out, and Mimi's shooting blood out of his mouth like Gene Simmons, and they had some bogus instruments, and I was carrying the drumsticks and playing on the turnbuckle and all this kind of stuff. And then at the end of it, Sandman comes out and destroys us. So that was my that was my one shining moment of being in the BWO. Plus we did promos that night, and if you've ever heard the stories, most of the promos got cut way after the show was over.
Yeah.
So I think it was 4 or 5 in the morning, and we're outside still in gear, and it was summertime, but it was cold at that point, and we're out there and doing some kind of crazy thing where somebody drove a car up and we all piled into the car, and I don't remember the specifics of it, but that ended up on TV too. But that was all because I had the hair, right? And I was a musician, and again, Scotty trusted me to do it, and that was a great opportunity. So that was really cool.
It's one of the iconic moments.
Reunion, the Hardcore Homecoming, I think, was the reunion show in 2005.
Yeah,
and I was not booked on the show, but of course I was there in the back helping out, visiting and whatever, and and they were having a meeting at intermission, and we're trying to come up with some kind of angle for this long drawn out thing with him and Sandman and Mimi and the Mouseketeer and Mikey Whipwreck and a few other people. They were just doing some big schmoz, and so I got booked in to do that, where I came out and attacked Raven and Sandman, and then took off one shirt, and I was wearing one of my old Don E. Allen shirts underneath, and did like the Dreamer Raven pose, that deal. And then Whipwreck came out, and he hit me a few times and tossed me over the top, and that was it. But I got to be on that show, which was cool, and ended up on a video and all that good stuff. So
that's very cool.
Pure luck.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I remember seeing that taking place when the Hardcore Homecoming happened all those years ago. And
it was the same weekend as, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it was the same weekend as the one that WWE did.
Yeah.
Right? They're famous. The one, I guess, did they call it One Night Stand? Was that the one?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So it was that same weekend, and a lot of the same guys were on both shows, but not everybody. Terry Funk famously chose to work ours and refused to work Vince's, which was like a big deal at the time because they
Yeah.
wanted him on that one. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it was quite the weekend, that's for sure. Um, one thing I was really interested in asking about, and sorry, Don, we're coming toward the end of the interview, getting close. So I
I'm
want to thank you
yakking
for your
too
time
much. I
again.
apologize.
No, that's okay. But doing my research, June 1st, '96, you worked Shane Douglas for the television title The Arena. In my research after that, you don't wrestle another match for ECW till 1998, I believe, where you have a one-off match at the Woodhaven Sports Center on June 20th against someone known as the Equalizer.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know what happened in '96 and where Don E. Allen went and why the big gap between those two.
I went nowhere. I was all of those shows. Now, mind you, I didn't travel to all the out of town shows.
Yeah.
I was mainly, if it was Jersey, if it was Pennsylvania, if it was Delaware, Maryland. I rarely, I can count on one hand maybe the times I ever went up to a New York show. It's just because I also, through this whole time, I was playing gigs. I was in a number of different bands and doing solo work, and I didn't make very much on the wrestling side. I don't want to talk too much about the money aspect of things, but I was never guaranteed that I was going to be on any of these shows. I ended up being on a lot of them for a good few years,
Yeah.
but as we got into '96 and '97, '98, things were blowing up, right? And there were more and more guys that were both showing up to try to get a spot on the shows, and more guys that were being brought in from out of town. So you had your Kid Cashes and just any number of people like that who were not local guys. It was easy for me to be at those local shows because it was within an hour or 2 hours, travel for the most part from home. So that was easy for me. But as the momentum started building up with the company, more and more guys were showing up, and a lot of these guys, frankly, were bigger talents than I was, and I had more upside to do something for the company long term. So it was never a conversation that we had. It was just simply I kept showing up, and I still had my gear, and I did whatever I was asked to do, and I did things in the back as I always did. Um, but that's kind of what happened. So it was just an organic thing, and I also did start working some indie shows more at that time. I would still ask, and I don't know if they laughed at me for asking, but they seemed to appreciate it because I would say, hey, I have an opportunity to do this, and Paulie said, is it? I remember him saying a couple times, he goes, is it a payday? And I said, yeah. He goes, do it. So
Cool.
So yeah, and then there was a few. I still would do run-ins on angles and stuff like that. So you would still see me on TV, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been mentioned necessarily. But if
Right.
there was a crowd out there breaking up a fight or something like that, I can remember a good couple of times doing those kind of spots with guys who were around in the later part, the Eliminators and the Samoan Gangsta Party
Yeah.
and things like that, where they just needed everybody from the back to come out and do stuff. So yeah, but it just that's just the way it happened, and it made perfect sense. I was realistic about that too. I had no reason to believe they were going to invest any great time or effort in me, and I don't think they should have really. So that thing in '98, the Equalizer was a buddy of Bigelow's, I think, a big tattooed, pierced guy. Paulie was his name, and but that was just a match as a precursor to Bigelow and Taz were building up their feud. So it did make it to TV, or I don't know if the whole match is, but I think it did. And I have a video of it. There was like a fan cam video also that's decent. But so we just worked for like a minute or a minute and a half, and then Taz made a long, slow entrance, with the black towel on his head,
Yeah.
and he just came into the ring and destroyed us. I landed on my neck and my head really badly that night. I remember that. And this stuff you don't necessarily hear about. But I went in the back and thought maybe something was broken or fractured. We didn't know. I couldn't turn my head. They gave me damage control. Our our EMT folks gave me a hard collar to wear going home just in case. And I went back home, which was like an hour away, and just took myself right to the hospital to get checked out because I thought, well, if something's broken, I don't want to, jar it and get paralyzed. So,
Right, of course.
and it wasn't, but it was, it was a little scary. But that's again the kind of stuff would happen. Just keep moving.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about this. All American Wrestling. You become the AAW Pennsylvania State Heavyweight Champion after defeating Kid America, aka referee Mike Keener.
That's right.
Could you please tell me tell me a little bit about that? Wrestling for another company and winning a championship like this, that means that you must be having longer, more competitive matches as opposed to what you were used to in ECW. So this must be something a little bit different. How was this experience?
It was a lot of fun. It was weird because sometimes I was being asked to call the matches, and of course I knew how to do it, but I hadn't done it a lot, and so that was a different thing. I was a face for a lot of them, so usually your heel calls. Traditionally the heel calls match, but
yeah,
it was cool. I mean, I got to do things. I got to throw drop kicks and arm drags and stuff that I would never do in the ring with with the big guys, right? Because most of these guys were more my size, and it was just cool because there was a level of respect, I guess, because they knew that I had been where I'd been. So I was accorded a little bit of a little deference, and that was cool, and I enjoyed that. And I kept doing that. I mean, AAW, these were just local guys, some really good workers, some, ended up not being so great, but I got videos of those shows, the Battle Royals were always where they throw everybody and even the guys that weren't ready to work full matches. And there's videos of guys that went on to do really great things who were just starting, and I was the vet even then at that point. So guys like Trent Acid,
right.
If you're familiar with
Yeah.
who I worked with when he was green, and throwing clotheslines with like a stiff arm like this. It's so funny to watch because he became such a great worker. And a little bit later, but the same idea was a group that I worked for called ACPW, American Championship Pro Wrestling, and those guys gave me a lot of work, a lot of spots, and that's also kind of where I helped train some guys too. But worked with guys there like Adam Cole, as a rookie, was on shows with Drew Gulak as a rookie, and it's cool now. I mean, it was a while ago, but those are guys who are now they're veterans, and really made a name for themselves. So that was pretty cool. These are all local to me. Again, within an hour or two, these shows were close enough to home that I could do them and still, work. I was working a day job through this whole time, which I don't know if everybody realized, but I mean, I was certainly not making a living and couldn't have made a living off of wrestling at that point. So I had a full-time day job and the music and the gigs, the wrestling shows. So, but yeah, it was cool. It was cool to pull the strat and get to do longer form matches, and worked with Keener a lot. Again, shout out to Mike Keener, just one of the best guys ever. Just a
Yeah.
great ref, and a real decent in ring performer. He had his moments as Kid USA. He could work. He knew what to do. He knew how to call matches, and yeah, he was good. And he's helped train a lot of guys, more guys than people realize. He's helped train along the way too. So, and he's still active. I know he still does Maryland Championship Wrestling all the time, and I think MLW, especially
Yeah.
when they're in Philly. So he's popped up on their TV, both the old Court Power shows and the newer ones.
Yeah.
So yeah, excellent guy.
Cool. And I've got a couple more questions here, Don. There were a few TWA reunion shows in the late 2000s that you got to be a part of. How fun was that to, kind of get back together with those guys from that era?
It was awesome. Yeah, it's like seeing your old, it's like family reunion. Most of them, you ran into over the years, but some not so much. And there were some people in that audience that didn't really continue going to shows that I recognized and were seeing for the first time in a long time. So
Right.
that was cool. And again, I got to work some longer form matches, which was really cool. Worked with, had a match with Jimmy Giannetti, who was a big TWA guy. He was a Philly guy and an old friend. Worked with, who else? The Mike Tartaglia, who was the hitman, Michael Bruno, back in the day, and he was a TWA guy, and he came up same time as me, began training, and he later went on to own ECWA. He bought that.
Right.
He and Joe Zanoli, who was a referee in TWA, those guys ran the ECWA out of Delaware for a long time. I think Joe is still running it. I think Mike now is not involved, but they were really the brains behind the TWA reunions, and so they were very kind to invite me to be part of it. And I have two or three or four of my favorite matches that I've ever done. I did for them. Did a tag match. I think it was. I can't believe I forget. I teamed with somebody against Kid USA and Blue Mimi, but I can't remember who I teamed with right now. Which is
I'll be able to find it. I can find it.
Yeah, somebody's mad at me, but anyway, yeah, it was really cool. I'm sorry that they didn't keep doing those, because that would have been fun to do.
I'm saying, let's have a look here. Yep, the first one I see, singles with Michael Bruno. The next one, the Red, White, and Blue Express with Kid America and the Blue Meanie against you and Jimmy Giannetti. Another singles.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, another singles with Giannetti, and then I think the last TWA was a 6-man gauntlet that you were a part of. Right,
and I worked a singles match against Giannetti too, against him at one of the TWA shows as well. So I think there were 4 or 5 of those shows, and then there was one where I was just in a battle royal, but I don't think I worked singles on one of them, and that was. Now the funny thing is, Carino, who was not yet in the business when we did the original TWA, was such a fan of those shows, because they were like the first shows that he went to live, local, that he got on those TWA shows. He wanted to be on them, and work with Hitman Tony Stetson and some of these other guys that were part of them. So that was pretty cool. He had a real good match against Al Snow on on one of those, and Snowy's great. I just saw him at that reunion in December too, at the convention, I should say. So cool. It was cool. And I think I was wearing one of his shirts. He sells these. He's got that brand, Collar and Elbow, and I just went over to him. I went, I hope you're getting paid for this. And he goes, yeah. I go, oh, cool. Yeah, I don't know if he lends his, if he's like a figurehead or if he was really making something from him. But
Right.
so happy to see
Yeah.
him. That guy, just yeah, what a classic, what a wealth of knowledge, and anybody gets a chance to get trained by him is a lucky person. So
Definitely. And I wanted to ask you about the 18th of June, 2011. Don E. Allen defeats Chase Rawlings at the ACPW Arena in Fallcroft, Pennsylvania.
yeah,
Is this the last match? Was this the last time you had a match in the ring?
no, it was one of the last ones,
Okay.
but my last match, and I always say so far because nobody ever retires, right? Not in our business anyway. My last match was in October of 2012.
Right.
I worked a few matches in 2011 and 2012, and the last one was, and it was really only the last one because I got hurt pretty bad. Got thrown out of the ring and just had a bad landing on the arena floor, and it at that point things had been piling up, the knees and the shoulders, everything's pretty messed up after all those years of bumps. So I just didn't go back. I've been in the ring a couple of times briefly when I visited my friends. He had a training place set up and had a ring set up, and I did go in and bumped around a tiny little bit, but that's been it so far. But stay tuned. Somebody just has to make me the right offer.
Sounds
I can
good,
still cut a
Don.
promo. I just don't know if I don't know how long I can go without blowing up. I was not a body guy, right? And I never took roids or anything like that. But my cardio was pretty good, and I literally was in the gym 5 to 6 days a week, every year for like 25 years straight, out of need to do that for survival. I could not have done what I did, even just getting the crap beat out of you, you know, to do what you have to do to be in the right spot at the right time, to get through that with cardio that you need, and some bulk, required a lot of work and dedication. And after 2012, when I had that injury and I stepped back for a little bit, fully thinking I was going to go back. And then my parents, who were elderly, I started having to do some caregiving for them. And, I was going to the gym 3 times a week, and then twice, and then once, you know, and then I just stopped. So it was like, and once you do that, once you stop, it's really hard to go back. And when I think that I would do anything to make sure that I got the workouts in for 25 to 30, really almost 30 years straight, it was a lot of time and effort, and it had to be done, and I'm glad I did it. But I couldn't go back in the ring now unless I got myself in the right kind of shape, because it would be dangerous. It would be dangerous for
Yeah.
me and for anybody I worked with. I would love to say that I could get back there and do it, and I still might try at this point, but um, it's not in the immediate plans now. I miss it. I miss it like crazy. It's hard to describe, but when
Yeah.
you've been in there, and there's just a certain feeling when you hit the bumps right, and grabbing the headlock or being in one, and just that squeeze and backing into the ropes, and I mean everything in that ring hurts, honest to God, but you you're so used to it, and it's just a part of you. And when you don't have that feeling, when you don't wake up in the morning with the mat burn and the bruising, on your back from the cables and the ropes, you actually miss it, as crazy as that sounds. So
Right.
yeah, I miss it a lot, but it's probably discretion is the better part of valor, as they say right now. So
Fair enough, Don. And look, I think at this time I should take the time to give a shout out to Mr. Bay Ragney, who
oh
was the
yeah,
one. He was able to connect us. So I want to
yeah.
thank him, of course.
I
And
worked his, he had a nice promotion going for a while.
Liberty All
LAW,
Star.
Liberty All Star Wrestling,
Yep.
and I worked a bunch of his shows too, and I think I worked sound for a couple of them. In fact, I did that for the TWA shows too. I actually not only did I work them, but I got there early and brought a PA system, from the band and set
Right.
it up, so people could actually hear the ring announcements, which on some indie shows are horrendously bad, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so shout out to me, man. I did double duty on this.
Very cool. So I want you to take this time now, Don, to just let everyone out there know what's been going on with you, what you're doing with your life these days. Tell us about your music. Tell us everything. The floor is yours.
Yeah, still working a day job. I hate it, but that's what I do. 5 days a week. And music wise, I'm freelance bass player, guitar player, and drummer. And I freelance, but I work regularly with a bunch of bands. There's probably 8 or 9 different bands that will call me to do gigs. None of them are full time, but amongst all of them, they keep me busy. So I'm usually working at least 1 or 2 nights a week out in the bars and clubs, and I do private events, and whatever comes up. If I get the call and I can do it, I do it. So that's all cover band stuff, right?
Yep.
Um, mostly mostly classic rock, whatever sells in the clubs and gets people out to dance. That's what I do. And then I've always done my own music. I've got three CDs that I've done. None of them are really available for sale at the moment, but once I get cranking on the new CD, which is almost done, I'm gonna figure out a way to at least get those streaming somewhere so everybody can hit them up if they want to. And I have a website. It's not really updated at the moment, but there's a couple of my tunes on there, older songs, and a couple of pictures if you want to see me in, not laying on my back with blood oozing out of my face. So that's it's DonnieAllen.com, not Don E like the wrestling. It's DonnieAllen. DonnieAllen.com is my website. And again, plans are to revamp that soon and actually get it up to date. I don't even think that I know the dates on there for gigs and that sort of thing aren't at all up to date, but working with a web mistress who will be fixing that up for me soon, and then we'll be setting up all kinds of streaming options for the original songs. So
Very
that's
cool.
that's what's up right now. If you're anywhere in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, anybody watching this, that's that's where I dwell. So Philly, Bucks County, Delaware County, Montgomery County, Chester County, some state of Delaware, and some Maryland is kind of where I roam as far as the music jobs.
Very cool. And I'll make sure that DonnieAllen.com will be in the description there for everyone
Sweet.
just to click on,
I
check it out.
appreciate it. Yeah.
No problem, Donnie.
All the bands have their own Facebook pages and stuff. I can't give you all of that now. I could probably email that stuff to you if you care to.
Please do, and
post that.
I'll pop that in the description as
Sweet.
well.
Awesome.
Excellent. Donnie, we get to our final segment here of the show. We now know what you're up to these days. This is the final segment. We want to learn about your favorite things here. It's quick fire questions for quick fire answers. Donnie Allen,
Okay.
who is your favorite pro wrestler of all time?
It's changed a bit over the years. Man. I'm gonna say it could change day to day, but I'm gonna say right now, I'll say Jack Briscoe. Jack
Very
Briscoe, the
nice.
legendary NWA champion of the mid '70s, and he Jerry Briscoe, who you guys may know from WWF later, but it was his brother and tag team partner too. But him, Billy Robinson, those are like the technical guys that I love to watch. And then just as personalities and people that captured my imagination when I was really young, San Martino, Freddie Blassie was a big one for me back in the day, and Jimmy Valiant, not the boogeyman Jimmy Valiant, but I mean same guy, but back when he was bleach blonde, handsome Jimmy Valiant. Just his charisma and kind of the way he carried himself and his ring gear and all that stuff when I was real young loomed very large in my history. So those are the guys. But right now, I'm gonna say Jack Briscoe. I just loved the realism that he brought to what he did and his technical skills. Yet, even with all the technical skill, he still sold like a pro wrestler is supposed to sell. And I just thought he was great. Yeah, love watching his matches.
I think that's a great choice. Yes.
Yeah.
And the next one is, do you have a favorite opponent that you had over the years?
Hmm. Hmm. I should have thought of these. I should have anticipated this, right? Man. Um, so many of those matches were cool. I'm gonna say just for historical purposes, I'm gonna go with Stan Hansen, just just because of where he sits in the history of our sport, both in Japan and here in the United States, and
Yep.
and the legend and the respect that people have for that guy. That I'm really proud that I got to spend a couple minutes working with him.
Awesome. Is there one match in your career that you had that you would say was your favorite match performance that you were ever a part of?
Well, no, again, probably should have thought of that, right? Um, nah, there's so many that have great moments that I look back on and just uh, you know, it's a tough one.
I know
It's
it's
a
tough.
really tough one. Um, I can't think of one off the. I don't want to slight anybody, but um, no, I took something from all of them, and I learned something from all of them, and they were all good. The two matches I had, well, actually, I had three. I'll say the three matches. Two were on TV that I had with the late
Yep.
Salvatore Bellomo, who was a WWF guy back in the '80s, and then was with us as a very different kind of character in the
Yep.
early days of ECW. Um, yeah, I got to have some really fun matches with him where I got to show some personality, got in some offense, but also had to do some cool selling for him, and they were both really good. Yeah, and then we did one private event together too that was a lot of fun that nobody saw, but so
Awesome.
yeah.
Moving away from wrestling now, do you have a favorite book?
I'm not much on books. I like periodicals. I'm a magazine guy. I always have been. I read books for school when I had to, but um, let's say, I mean, I don't know. I read some of the wrestling books, like Lou Thesz's autobiography,
Yeah.
Hooker. That was a good one.
Yeah.
And Billy Robinson's book I read. Um, a lot of them I haven't caught up with yet, like all the cool books that McFoley wrote, and shout out to McFoley, who was always so kind to me. And yeah, anyway, so yeah.
Awesome.
No, I hate to say it. I know it makes me sound illiterate, but I'm really not a book guy.
That's okay.
I don't really have a favorite book.
Not a problem, and I would recommend checking out Mick Foley's books because they are
Oh yeah,
very
I mean,
funny.
I know about them, and Jericho's books I know are great. I just haven't gotten around to them quite yet.
That's okay. Do you have a favorite TV show, Don?
I should, right?
Even one maybe you had as a kid or something like that.
Yeah. Something else I had not thought about. Carl, you getting me, man.
I'm sorry, Don. I
Me.
didn't mean to test
Do
you
you
too
have a
much.
TV show? Other than wrestling, right? Um, yeah, let's say there was a TV show. It was like Saturday Night Live, but like sort of a junior version of it, and it was called Fridays in the States.
Right. Okay. Yep.
And And the cool thing about Fridays, I mean, just like SNL, they would have live music performances, but they always just seem more like loose and crazy. And I remember, again, I'm really old, but seeing the Clash on there, who are heroes of mine, and the Cars and the Pretenders, heroes of mine, that played live on this show. So they did some crazy sketch comedy. Um, I can't even. The only guy on there I think that went on to be famous at all was the guy who played Kramer on Seinfeld, the guy with the crazy hair.
Michael Richards, yep.
Michael Rich, right? That I think Fridays was his first big thing
Oh,
he ever
okay.
did. He was part of the. It was like an ensemble cast, right? That did
Yeah.
skits and stuff. All right, but yeah, that I'll say that because they had the best live music performances on there. Stray Cats were on there, like all the cool punk and new wave stuff that SNL wouldn't necessarily have. They had. So
Right. That's very cool.
yeah, so yeah, I'll go with that.
Excellent. And do you have a favorite film?
Hard Day's Night, Beatles.
Excellent. Great choice. Do you have a favorite musical artist or band?
That's evolved a little bit over the years. I'm gonna say Springsteen probably is has probably been my biggest inspiration as far as live performance and songwriting. But I mean, I listen to everything, and there's a lot of people that I love. Again, my time, the stuff you fall in love with when you're a teen and stuff like that tends to stay with you as your favorite. I find for most people, but I'm always looking for new stuff. I play classic rock out in the club, so I know all that stuff and I love it. But I'm a big punk and pop punk fan, so Elvis Costello and everybody since that does that kind of stuff.
Yep.
I'm a sucker. I'm just a sucker for that. Just like good melodies, but with like crazy energy. People thrashing around on stage. I dig that. But I like everything. I'll mellow out, listen to the Grateful Dead, and whatever.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Getting away from the arts now, we've only got a couple more here to go. Do you have favorite food?
Pizza.
Excellent choice. A very popular one on the show.
I didn't have to hesitate there.
Do you have a favorite place to eat on the road?
No, well, in our area, there's a place called Wawa that usually is a 24-hour place, and any place in Pennsylvania and Jersey and environs, you'll find that. Certainly, everybody will tell you Cracker Barrel if you're really on the road, but again, I didn't spend all that much time out there, and on the big trips. So I would say within the several 100-mile radius of home base for me, it's our local Wawa convenience store.
Excellent. Do you have a favorite beverage?
Wild cherry Diet Pepsi.
Very nice. I like that.
Yeah.
The second
I
last
don't
one
drink.
here, Don.
I've been playing in bars since I was a teenager, and I was never a drinker. I think maybe I was exposed to all of the various effects of alcohol on people early, and somehow I just decided it was not where I was headed. So,
no, props to you. That's pretty cool. Second last one here, Don. This could be considered the naughtiest one of this segment. Favorite female body part. You see a good-looking lady, where will you look to first?
Backside.
Excellent.
I'm a butt guy from way back. Not necessarily like big, not like necessarily like Kardashian size.
Right,
You know what I'm saying? It has to be appropriate for the rest.
Of course.
But I find that's aside from everything else, I have to check that out and see what's going on back there before I can formulate a final opinion. Not that anybody cares about my opinion, and certainly no women should care about my opinion. But yeah, that's it. one of the ways I got through all those years at the gym, doing half hours on the Stairmaster, was making sure I was behind other people on the Stairmaster where I could make those studies and observations, and it never got old. So I'll just leave it at that.
No, I find it admirable, and that's the kind of study that I will do as well. So
yeah,
no problem.
boy,
And by the way, every time somebody says that as the answer, I have to let them know that it's also Mr. Don Muraco's answer was.
Oh, okay, okay.
Tush. So
Don, another veteran who was very, very good to me.
Yes,
much appreciated. Yeah, he was cool.
He's a very nice man.
Yeah, there's a great picture. The December 99, the December 94. It wasn't Pro Wrestling Illustrated. It might have been the Wrestling Insider, one of the Apter magazines, right?
Yep.
By the way, I got to do it. Shout out to Bill Apter, who was a friend to me early on in my career for no particular reason except we share a goofy sense of humor, and gave me some opportunities that, again, realistically, I don't think I deserved for where I was at the time. And that guy, I owe him a lot. So, and we're still buddies to this day, and are in touch on occasion to say hi. And great guy. And so shout out to him. But anyway, I'm in that magazine. They did like an article about me for some reason, and there's a great picture of Muraco holding me up in a vertical, which I think he held for like a minute. And it's just a great picture. It's one of my favorite pictures. So that's all.
Excellent. No, cool. And the last one here for the segment of the favorite things. Don, do you have a favorite curse word?
I say what the fuck a lot, so I guess it would have to be fuck, which is such an all-purpose word, and carries so many different meanings, and many of those meanings are very meaningful to me. So I'm gonna go with that for now. Again, that evolves over time, but and now, of course, everything gets abbreviated, right? So what the fuck became WTF for everybody, right? You see that all the time. And now I hear people just going, the fuck? Like just FU, like just like the and FU. So that's what it's come to. So maybe the fuck is where it is for me now.
Very cool answer, Don. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and talk about your life, talk about your career. I had so much fun, so many great stories. You're a great storyteller. And I want you to know that, right here, all the way over in the most isolated city in the world, Perth, Western Australia, you reached that far and you got a fan all the way over here. So I think that's pretty cool.
That is crazy. I watch videos of Springsteen playing in Perth, and he gets over to Australia, and his big thing, just like you were saying the other day about the summer over there, he goes, he finishes a song and like, everything's quiet. And he goes, "Why is it so damn hot over here?" So,
it's a nightmare.
Yeah, man. I hope things cool off for you. I figured you were, participating in the Australian Open. Isn't that going on right now?
Oh, I don't watch the tennis.
Nah. Some good backsides going on in that the ladies play. But anyway,
maybe I should check it out then.
It's hit or miss. It's hit or miss. But if you're the earlier rounds, usually anyway, I'm going to stop before I get in trouble. But I appreciate it, and anybody that watches this, you should know that Carl was after me to do this for about 28 years, and it took a long time, and I apologize. Even the fact that this worked at all is one of the great achievements of my life. So, but I appreciate your interest. I do thank Bay for for hooking us up, and you know where to find me.
Cool, bro. Yes, no, it's been great, and it's been worth the wait, Don. So thank you so much again for your time, my friend.
My pleasure. Have a good morning
out there for joining us here on the Insider's Edge podcast. I'm Karlifornia. This is my good friend, Mr. Johnny Allen. and we will see you down the road. Thank you.
Network, that's the way we play. Good God Almighty. Network, that's the way we play. Get puppies. Network, that's the way we play. Get.
The following announcement has been paid for by the WZWA Network.